Hej og velkommen til Joypad.dk's interview med den legendariske brætspilsdesigner Mark Herman. Det her interview foregår på engelsk, men hvis I har brug for det, så kan vi godt lave en dansk oversættelse på skrift. Det kommer der senere. Men i første omgang, så bliver den her video, der kommer på engelsk. Og jeg slår i engelsk nu. Hey Mark, and thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the Danish bit.
I did. Actually, I have been to your lovely country. I spent a week there on business, working for a company you might know called Lego.
Oh yeah.
I was in their offices in Copenhagen, and then I spent an interesting time in Billund.
Yeah.
At the what do you call it? Lego World, I guess they call it, or whatever. It was great. It was great.
Yeah, one of my cousins actually works there, so that's close to home actually.
Yeah. Great company.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah. So, Mark, let's start this out nice and easy. Can you give us like a brief summary of who you are and where you come from and what you're currently doing?
Wow, that's so that we're not here for 4 hours. I was so my birthday was yesterday, so I'm 64 years old. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1954. I did the usual growing up and went to college. And when I got out of college, I started working for a company called Simulations Publications Incorporated, that goes by its moniker SPI. And I became a game designer when I was, I guess I was 20 at the 20, close enough, 2021. I was 21. I was 21 years old and started being a game designer. And I've had a long career in board games, although a number of my games have been turned into computer games, no video games, but computer games. And I've now to date done, if you go to my website, I haven't counted in a while, but it's somewhere between 60 and 70 games I published over a 42-year-long career.
That's insane. Well, that's
if you get older, you keep doing something, eventually it adds up to something.
Yeah, that's true. What made you decide that you wanted to be a game designer for your work?
That's it. Well, I mean, I think not unlike many people who come out of college, you're not really sure what you want to do, with your life. And I had been an avid gamer all my life from like the age of 12. I played chess when I was fairly young, and then I moved on to war games around 12. And so, when I got out of college, when I was in college, I went to a game convention in Baltimore that was run by a very famous company called Avalon Hill. And I was at this convention and I talked to the staff of this company, SPI, and I said, how do you get a job? At that point, I was only a sophomore in college, but I was starting to think about, what are you going to do with your life? I was a history and biology major. And so they gave me sort of a, show up and start writing some articles and this, that, and the other thing. So I started doing that. And when I got out of college, I got the job there as the receptionist. And so I was a receptionist at a game company I was there for about 2.5 years, but I was off the desk pretty fast, and I was a game designer. I did 18 games in the 2.5-year period at SPI, which is it was a very dynamic company. We were putting out a lot of product. And then I went into I worked in the U.S. defense area. Then I came back to gaming, and I ran a company called Victory Games in the 80s. So I was a game publisher. And so I learned that whole side of the business. And then I went back into defense work until about 5 years ago. And now I'm back to being a full-time game designer again.
Well, we are quite a few who are thankful for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I got to tell you, I've always been very humbled by the fact that anybody wants to play my game. So I'm very happy that people do. So that's very nice. Nice of you to say. Thank you.
So this is, seeing as you've designed so many games, this is going to be a bit of a difficult question maybe, but what game design are you the proudest of or most happy with, if you can even name that?
I mean, there's a look. I apologize for the beeps every so often. I don't know how to turn that off. It's as I was telling you earlier, there's a lot of message traffic in my family around this new child coming along. So everybody saw the new sonogram, so they're all like, they're very, very excited. So it'll happen periodically. I apologize. So going back to favorite games. So actually, it's funny. I happen to be I'm sitting in a room, and this is probably the game. You can see Empire of the Sun. So I like that one a great deal. I play that one a lot myself, and I have to admit that game was done for me. And I think there's a game that you are familiar with that I like a great deal.
Yeah, definitely.
That's very cool. So I'm very happy with Churchill and its successor, which actually is funny. It seems to be doing very, very well in Europe, Pericles. I think it's a feature of the fact that Greek history is more about European history than American history. And so I think it's taught, if you were to go walk up to an American on the street and ask about the Peloponnesian War, they look at you like, like what? You tell them about the American Civil War, they'll understand what you're talking about. So I find Pericles. And then I think a game that you might, I don't know, did you review it, but this one has gotten some very good notice, Fort Sumter recently. So, but the game that I think that I would say that, all of those for the people. I like my card-driven games. I mean, I really like my card-driven games. Washington's War, For the People, Empire of the Sun, or games I come back to. And I play with friends still. Pericles, I have a group back in New York that I play Pericles with a lot. Churchill at a drop of a hat. So, those are kind of the games that my more recent designs that I play often. But I have some older ones that so often I pull up in a moment here and there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Speaking of Fort Sumter, that's actually gonna pivot into the next part. Fort Sumter is, in many ways, I think it's fair to say that it's a bit of a different game compared to what else you've done. When I say different, I mean in how complex it is, or rather that it's not so complex as many of your other games. And I don't mean it's less deep. I mean, it's less complex to get into. What gave you the idea to design this? I mean, I've read the designer notes in the game, so I know it. But for our viewers, what gave you the idea to design this game?
So, if I could, I'd like to at least start off. You used the word complexity, and I figure, let me take this opportunity to talk about that just for a brief moment, and then I can lead into your question if that's okay. I think that for board games now, video games have different challenges, usually in learning the interface. How do you interact with the game is usually the challenge with a video game. And I think the more popular video games are ones that the interface is sort of intuitive to the point where you don't even have to think about it. Some take a little bit more effort to get into, and as a consequence, they are considered more complex in a video game sense. But what's different about a board game and a video game is that in a board game, number one, there's no mediator. There's no computer to mediate the rules. You have to do all that yourself. The advantage of a board game is it's totally transparent. You know exactly how it works because you're the one running it, and the player experience is different because you're facing somebody, across a table or two. It could be a multiplayer game, but at least one other person, maybe three other persons, four, whatever. Now, complexity comes in three levels. One is what I'll call mechanical complexity. In other words, how many different mechanics do you have to deal with to just operate the game? So when you're playing a video game, you don't have those issues. The computer handles all the mechanical complexity of the game naturally. You don't deal with that. The other kind of complexity is what I would call teaching complexity. In other words, how do I communicate to somebody who just walked in my house, they're coming over for game night, and I'm going to teach you this game? And so when people talk about complexity, often that's what they're talking about. How fast does it take for somebody to absorb what they're supposed to do in the first or second session of the game? And I think it usually takes 2 sessions of most games to even get a clue. One game to just figure out how to operate it, and another game where you can start to explore strategy. And then the third part, which is what I think is good complexity, is the complexity of strategy. That there's so many, you can really get thematically into what can be done, and that's where a game gets legs and replayability and the desire for somebody to want to play it and explore it and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so now that we've sort of talked about that, so let's go back to your question now. So let me juxtapose this against, let's say, Pericles. Pericles is mechanically, even Churchill, mechanically it's simple, right? You play a card, you move a token on a map, there's other rules, obviously, but ultimately, you're trying to thematically have a debate at a conference table kind of thing in World War II as one of the great leaders of that conflict. If you only have one or two mechanics, it's not that hard to teach, right? You got to do, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. Now, Pericles, which is the successor to Churchill, has probably 6 simple procedures, but there's 6 of them. And so integrating 6 different things becomes complex in the first game. And that's why I created a training regime for that one. So again, that kind of situation. So what I did for Sumter, to your question, the idea was that I wanted a game that would be easy to teach. That was the complexity I wanted to get around. And so consequently, and I was seeing, so I invented card-driven games back in the 1990s, like 1994 when I did We the People, which has been now become, then it was very controversial. People said, oh, it's terrible, and it's not a historical war game, and it went on and on. Now today, they don't say any of those things. It's now mainstream, and everybody, the great success of Twilight Struggle sort of resolved all that. Now that's a mainstream game. A lot of people play Twilight Struggle, and so when they see one of my games, oh, it's like Twilight Struggle, I say, that's fine. What are you gonna do? But it's the more famous child of that genre. And then somebody did a game that was a small CDG derivative of Twilight Struggle. And I remembered that back early in my career, I did a game called Stonewall, which was on an American Civil War battle, but it was a very small game based on a much more complex system. So I realized that, I did that once, let me try that again. And so the inspiration was to do a small card-driven game. And so once I had a card-driven game, and then of course I added, but going back to why I did Fort Sumter, I wanted to create a game that was easy to teach, but that would have strategic depth. And that was really, but to have it easy to teach, it had to have very few mechanics. And so that's the point of my earlier conversations. So Fort Sumter was meant to be a very fast playing. It takes about, my wife and I play a game of Fort Sumter in like 20 minutes. Yeah. But there's a lot of, I think there's more strategic depth than some people understand who don't play it a bunch of times. But, like it's one of those things like all my games, you either get it or you don't get it, but there's so many other games out there. There's so many choices that it's found its audience and it's really doing very, very well. Some reviewers, have, given it great praise. Other reviewers have said it's a piece of junk, so it's the typical reviews are what they are. Mm-hmm. But it is accomplishing all of its objectives. As I've seen, I'm not known for having a large female audience, and Fort Sumter has brought in a great number of women are playing Fort Sumter, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, my own wife included. She loves the game, and in fact, when I got Churchill for review, I told her, well, it's the same dude who did Fort Sumter. Okay, I'm in. I want to play it. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, she's a sweet lady, and I'll tell you, I want to. She's in the next room, and I would drag her in, but she'll yell at me because she says my hair's not good or something. I don't know, but I've been married 40 years, so I know when not to bother her. Mm-hmm. But she was the measure of complexity. In other words, the Fort Sumter that you and your wife played is the 10th version of the game. And I had a group of hardcore gamers, war gamers, and in the first version, they loved the first version. And as I used my wife to sort of lower the complexity on teaching and how it played and all that, the hardcore war game guys liked it less, and all the women who were playing it liked it more. And I'm not saying that because my wife, they will play bridge and Mahjong, they're gamers, but and bridge is a very complex game to play if you actually understand strategy of bridge. So it wasn't that, it's just that they don't like mechanical complexity, too many mechanics to deal with. They want to deal with the strategy, which is what they all liked. And so I think that first off, I learned something from all this, is that, to have a broader audience, this mechanical complexity issue is important. So you can teach it quick, but people love deep strategic games. That's why they play bridge, and that's why people play chess and and Go and Mahjong and all that. Those are deep strategy games. But mechanically not complex, and I think that's really what makes them classic games in a way. That was figured out by the ancients, and they're still here today, right? So that's why I did Fort Sumter. I wanted to do a game that would be more accessible to a broader audience, but most importantly and I actually said this to the publisher, I said, I'm looking for a game that war gamers can play with their wives. I mean, I said that's my audience, and that has worked, and so I'm very happy with it from that perspective.
Yeah, from my experience, that worked perfectly. And so let's go from Fort Sumter into Churchill now, because we'll go back to Fort Sumter. There are some things about reviews and stuff that fits well, but we'll get to that later.
Sure. Whatever you want.
But let's take Churchill. Now, Churchill is, what really hit me about Churchill is theme. Sometimes I hear, coming from a video game review background, my look on board games is a little different than typical board game reviewers. So when I first got into board games, I heard all the time, there's Euro games who are like mechanical games, and then there are Ameritrash or whatever they call it, who are that's the thematic games. But I, especially with something like Pendragon and Churchill, I found that, to me, some of the most thematic games are war games. And especially Churchill, I really felt that theme of the three greats sitting around the table debating this, which was very impressive. What is basically a card game could give me this feeling. But theme and simulation, how much does that factor in when you design a game? And theme could be, that could be the historical simulation. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, of course. So this word theme is kind of a mushy term. Some people, so you felt the theme of Churchill, right? And thank you for that. That's what I was going for. However, a bunch of, big time reviewers said there was no theme. You see, so I have a theory, and it's not necessarily provable, but I believe that, all games are abstract at some level, right? You're not actually, in World War II, thank God, and, you're not doing, or you're not really running a railroad, so nobody gets hurt on the railroad. It's like, so amateurs can sort of experience different, genres of experience and immerse themselves. So I think it's ultimately, do you see the metaphor? Do you see the abstraction of what's being simulated? Then you think it's thematic. If you don't see the abstraction, then no amount of whatever else you do will give you that suspense of disbelief that's very important to theme. So, so what I was going for was, in fact, three people sitting around a table, and there's very many famous pictures of them sitting around this, a circle. And by the way, the table is circular because that's the table they always sat around. And the order in which you're sitting on the table it's the same, for whatever reason, political protocol being what it is, they were always sitting in the same places relative to each other around the table. So when you're sitting around the table in Churchill, you're sitting in the correct orientation to the pictures. Why make it up, right? You got a picture. Stalin sits here, and Roosevelt sits here, and Churchill sits here, and so that's how I did it. But what I wanted there was to tell it. But what's important is, in any game, forget about whether it's a historical game or Meeples in Disneyland or whatever it might be. and people love these titles, Eurogame, and it's a worker placement game. Humans like to categorize things, and I find that those categories are useful, but can be very limiting. So when I do a game like Churchill, people say, well, what is it? Is it this, that, or the other thing? They go, it's none of the above. They go, oh, I don't like it. It's like, I don't know what the heck that is. So, I'm known for that. I'm not trying to, last year, I think there was something like 6,000 new games produced in a year. So that means there's multiple games being published on a daily basis, if you think about that. And nobody's got that much time. So I've decided that I'm going to do the games. I'm not going to try to base my games on other games. I'm going to try to do a game that really speaks to that moment or whatever the story I want to tell. And if it's very specific to that story, hopefully it will carve out an audience that likes that. And you got to remember, in the world of board gaming, I'm like, teeny tiny. There's very famous game designers who sell tens of millions of copies. I've never sold tens of millions of anything. But I am known for doing games that are authentic to their theme. That they're authentic, and I think that's good enough. I can never tell. Nobody can tell you why a particular game takes off. It does or it doesn't. So I don't worry about that. I worry about doing a game that's authentic, tells a good story about what I want to tell the story about, and if you like it, you'll play it, you'll enjoy it, and like I said, your wife liked Fort Sumter, and she said, "I'll give Churchill a try." That's great. I mean, that's nice. But I certainly wouldn't expose her to Empire of the Sun. That one did for me, and she might not like that one so much. Not because it's that she's not smarter than you and I. It's that it may not be a theme or a story she wants to immerse herself in. It's the story, and so if she likes it, but she wants a story about the Pacific War, she'll like Empire of the Sun.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story about Empire of the Sun, by the way. I was on a business trip once. Remember, Empire of the Sun, by the way, which was not, I show you the box again, but it's a game about the war in the Pacific between the Allies and Japan. And I was on a business trip in Europe, and I happened to have with me a United States Rear Admiral who is now retired. And he saw the game. He said, "Oh, I'd like to try playing it." So I acted as the referee between himself and he's never played a war game in his whole life, but he's an admiral. Let's remember that part. And he's sitting against a friend of mine who played Empire of the Sun, who was really quite good at it. And in 15 minutes, he figured out the game and he destroyed the other guy because he understood the theme. I mean, he actually was an expert, and the game allowed an expert to be an expert. So I felt that was the right. I succeeded from my perspective. Yeah. I can teach an admiral to play a game he never played before. He can destroy somebody being an admiral. That means the game is authentic to its naval theme, and a naval person can pick it up because they understand those themes very strongly. When I did Churchill, a lot of gamers will tell you, like, I was reading Churchill's memoirs, and I wanted to play a game about being Churchill, and there was no game, so that's why I did the game. I mean, I did the game because I wanted to experience that story, and there was no other game out there that let me do that. So, hence Churchill.
Yeah, the more you talk about Empire of the Sun, the more I have to contact Tony after this and ask him if he has them in stock, because my readers are going to ask for a review of that game. I'm pretty sure.
Well, here's the good news. It is currently at the printer in China, and it will be available shortly. So it's already at the printers for the next reprint. It's out of stock right now, but it will be back in stock very soon.
Good.
Within months. After they print them in China, they have to sail them across the Pacific. For a Pacific game, it has to come back across the Pacific first.
Yeah. That's
and ironic. It is coming from a slow boat from China, so that's a funny that's an old metaphor in English, by the way.
Yeah, and it fits as well. Now, the one thing in my review of Churchill, I touched on the scoring and why I think it works both thematically and as a interesting gameplay choice. Now, what I didn't know, and what was sparked in the comment section, at least on the Board Game Geek translation we do, was a lot of comments about the former scoring from the first edition. And so I thought, for any one of our readers who only read our reviews on our Danish side, I I would actually like you to give an explanation of why you designed the scoring the way you did, especially in the first edition, which is different. Because I think
Yeah.
there are a lot of misconceptions out there about how the scoring works, and there have been some comments that are, well, I can only speak as a reviewer. For me, they seem based on the fact that people don't understand it, quite frankly. So I would like you as the designer to explain it.
Oh, sure. So just to catch people up, so one of the things that is true of, I'm sure it's not true of every game, but just about every game, the person with the most points wins, right? That's the basic rule of, checkmate. I have more pieces, I score more points. In bridge, you win based on more points. In mahjong, you win based on, getting mahjong and scoring more points. I mean, it's about having more. And my performance is always based on this metric of more. The problem with, where that wouldn't work in Churchill, remember I said to you that I do games based on the topic, is you have this wartime and alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, with three very different people, with three countries with different agendas. And they're in the process of destroying two very aggressive, well, three, Italy also, but three, an alliance of nationalistic, aggressive countries, being Germany, Italy, and Japan of that time. Well, thank God that's not the case anymore. But this is what they were dealing with. But I can't even tell you how many World War II games there are out there on the market. I mean, it must be, 200. Could be 300. I have no idea. Could be 1,000. I've been playing World War II games my whole life. There's a lot of them. On strategic level games, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of games on the topic. But Churchill is not a game about World War II per se. It's a game about an alliance trying to end World War II and redesign the world for the post-World War era. It's about what comes next, not what we're dealing with right now. However, before I can get to what comes next, I got to finish off the thing I'm in. So Churchill starts in 1943 at the point where the Allies know they're not going to lose the war, right? We're past, Pearl Harbor and the invasion of the Soviet Union, and the Germans have been stopped, and the Italians have been stopped, and the Japanese have been stopped, and now they're starting to, the Allies have the momentum, and they're going to win the war. It's just no matter how long and how costly, and it was very costly, but how long is it going to take to win the war? And as the war gets closer and so in the beginning of the game, you are an alliance, and if your metric is, I'm going to try to score the most points all the time, that's not an alliance. It doesn't even feel like an alliance, right? That's a competition. So what Churchill does is says that if you have one of your jobs at Churchill is not only to be in first place, but to not make sure that third place is close. It's an alliance. You have to be giving, you have to be getting and giving, but maybe you're getting just a little bit more is the trick in Churchill, not to just blow out the game. But of course, gamers being what they are. So there are three conditions for winning Churchill. Condition one is the Germans and Japanese have lost the war. You've made them surrender. And the score is within 20 points. The guy in first place wins the game. Okay, that's simple. Now, condition two says, well, you beat, the Germans and the Japanese surrendered, but one player has gone very far ahead and has gone ahead in points more than the 20. They've expanded the score. And then what is being simulated is that if that had happened in the real situation, if, like, say, the United States had, just gone amok and not really paid attention to the British and to the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union was getting way ahead and didn't pay attention to the Western Allies, there would have been a break in the alliance would have occurred. The alliance would have shattered, And so what it says in the condition 2 victory is if you win with the most points, but you're way ahead, if your score is more than the other two scores combined, you win the game. But if your score is not more than the other two combined, then effectively what you've done is you created the World War III, where you're the weaker guy and you've actually lost. You actually lost, and the stronger of the two powers in the other coalition is the winner of the game. That caused a level of nerd rage you can't even. Coming back, did I lose you?
No, we're back now. It works now again.
I'm sorry.
The last word was nerd rage, more than I can imagine.
Yeah, good. Then you didn't say. I didn't say anything after because then it flipped. So, and what it was is a lot of gamers who consider themselves to be expert gamers, their groups and all that, would say that my group were very competitive and this is ridiculous. That's not how I've played every game I've ever played in my entire life. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. And what they were doing was there's condition 3. So we're going to describe condition 3. Condition 3 says that there's been so much infighting in the alliance that Germany and or Japan or both have not surrendered by a certain amount, by the 1945, and the world has gone totally chaotic. And now, in fact, World War II is becoming World War III, and you're going to realign. The Germans are going to get on somebody's side, the Japanese are going to get on somebody's side, and the war is going to continue. Now, the game accounts for that by saying that if you win the game, if you're in first place and you win the game by more than 13 points, you win the game. And now going back to your original question, I apologize to your viewers, but if you didn't understand the context, it would make no sense.
No, that's perfect. No.
Yeah. In that case, if you win by less than 13 points, I used to have a die roll where the guy in first place would lose whatever the die roll. It's a 6-sided die, so you could lose up to 6 points. The guy in last place could gain up to 6 points, and the guy in the middle can lose up to 3 points. So you could see, if you have won by less than 13, the guy in last or the guy in second could now win the game in this chaotic world that you allowed. And that set another bunch of people off, saying this game is ridiculous, except for those reasons. But I said to them, if every time you play the game, you come up with the situation. So the game got for amongst others, say, the game comes down to a die roll. And that meant that they were playing the game where they were just fighting with each other the whole game, and nobody could figure out a strategy that could win by more than 13 points, which means it was a close game. So they would do that over and over again, or at least a couple of times, and say, this is stupid. The answer is they never explored, if you can't defeat somebody by 13 lousy points, which is not hard to do in Churchill, by the way. If you can't win by more than 13 points, then your strategy failed, and they couldn't understand the fact that they failed. And so the die roll, this whole idea that a die roll determined the game. So what I did was, in the second, the reprint, it's now been through to, I think it's going into its 3rd reprint now. What happens now is all I said was I took the original rule and I decided that the die roll was 5 in all cases. So that established the range. Now you have a very fixed number, and now you know if you fell behind that number, you didn't get there. And that's all it really was. It was taking out an area of look, I want people to have fun when they play into my games, and if this is going to cause you discomfort, it's a little thing to fix, right? I said, okay, the die roll is 5, which is a fairly aggressive die rolls. That means that what I was saying was that the person in first place is going to lose 5 points, the person in last place gains 5 points, and the guy in the middle is going to lose 3 points. That's all I did. And so I just established the numbers around a die roll of 5. It's the same rule. If you want to play it the old way, which is easily to do, you just roll the die. But if you're gonna break the alliance and not try to play the theme, it allows you to do that, but you're playing a different alternate history to what happened, and that's all it is to it. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted, because
good.
I actually really liked the scoring system. I thought it was a great. For me, the whole idea of Churchill was the diplomatic relations between these three and how they had to create, like you said, a new world after World War II. So that, for me, at least fit in perfect with the score. That you could not simply have, and it's the same. Say you play a game called Hearts of Iron 4 in multiplayer on PC.
Oh, I played it.
Yeah, and you have one player.
I played 4. I played like 2.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's basically still the same. But let's say you have one player, they have an alliance, and one of the players just takes too much land, gets a great production up and running and everything. It's going to be a given that the 2 other players are going to form a coalition against that player, and so suddenly he will be in a weaker position, and that is what you simulated in the scoring. So I thought it was excellent from a game design point, but yeah, nerds will rage.
Well, it also goes back to this thing. If you see what the points are trying to accomplish, you understand the thematic of the points. The points are part of the game. In other words, it's how you judge your position. And all I'm saying in Churchill is that your position is not only in magnitude, who has the most points, but it's the relative points that determines the health of the alliance. Yeah. And if the alliance is unhealthy, as you say in Hearts of Iron, the alliance will break up naturally. But again, I use the points as a way to make you aware of where the health of the alliance is, and that's how I use the points.
Yeah. Well, I think that's let's take a little discussion about reviews.
Okay, sure.
You did a guest blog on a website called Katie's Game Corner, where Katie Adley, I should say, is a
She's
great.
Like a very. I hope to have lunch with her someday. She seems like a very nice lady, and but obviously we haven't crossed paths, but we've corresponded. And she's I think she's a nice asset to our hobby. She really writes good content. She's enthusiastic in a way that I find to be very ingratiating. So she's very nice.
Yeah, she's great. I really enjoy her work. But on that blog, you said, and I quote you here. So
yeah, I said.
I like that she prefers to actually play a game a bit before rendering her view. Something that I hope to see other reviewers emulate. Could you go into a little more detail of what you mean exactly here?
Oh, absolutely. So there is a group of people who are, and I wish them well, they are, they've turned the reviewing into a small business, which is a great thing. We need that. There has to be other places for people to make, who are not game designers or publishers, to, contribute to the richness of our hobby, and just like you're doing. But I guess at some point, scale matters, right? So there's 24 hour, we all live in 24-hour days, and you have a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, and a wife, and you probably have a day job, and so this is all done in the margins of all of that, right? I was a game designer in the I also had a daughter and a son, 7 years apart. You were smart to have them a little closer together, but the point was, I went to. I was a soccer coach, and I played soccer in college, so I was a soccer coach, and I was on a swim team, so I took my son at 5 o'clock in the morning to swim matches, all this kind of stuff, right? So you have a life. When you review in that kind of milieu, you get to know the topic, you play the game enough to understand what it's really trying to do. And some games give up their secrets quickly. Some games give up their secrets and you realize that there wasn't much to be given up in the first place, so they're not very good. But whatever. But at least you spend the time with the subject matter to become acquainted with its ins and outs, so that you can fairly evaluate what it is that it does or doesn't do from your perspective. But when you try to scale it up to the point where you're doing multiple reviews of games per day, you're cranking out videos, or cranking out content, multiple times a day. And the reason you're doing that is you're trying to generate clicks of advertising revenue, and volume and content and turnover matter. Okay, I get that. But as a consequence, there's still only 24 hours in a day. And, a game of Churchill, if you play just the tournament scenario of Churchill, is going to take 2.5, 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
That's a fair amount, and it wasn't meant to be. Now Fort Sumter, you could play that. You can play Fort Sumter 12 times in that period of time. It's a 20-minute game, so that's easier to review. But and which is the kind of game that they like to review because it's fast. But if you're going to play a game, three-hour game, and then there was this, there was a learning scenario which only takes about an hour. The 3-turn scenario. So what I saw with Churchill was a number of people played the training scenario like once or twice and then rendered judgment. That's fine. It's there. It's a free world and you get to say whatever you want. But what I found amusing was Churchill was, I think one guy put it on his blacklist. It was a blacklisted game. I won't say the guy's name, but you can find it pretty easily. And then, I'll come back and give him some credit. And then Churchill was won best war game of the year that year on Board Game Geek. So it had an audience. And I guess there was an exchange he and I had, and he was saying something about reviewers. Just it's my opinion, and just because I have an opinion doesn't mean that that's the opinion of everybody else. And I wrote, like Churchill, he said, yeah, you got me on that one. So, he was good enough to acknowledge that he had a view, and he hates the game, by the way. I have a friend of mine who knows him well, and they argue about it. He says, I'm never going to like that game. I don't care what you say to me. Okay, that's fine. My other friend loves that game, thinks it was, this other reviewer says it, again, I'm quoting him, I'm not believing this. He said it was the most significant design in the last 10 years, he says. So that's probably too far over the line that way. Blacklisting is too far over the... So I think Churchill's somewhere between those two poles. It's not the most innovative thing in the last decade, and it certainly isn't a crappy game. So what can I say? But I find that ultimately is if you have fun with it, it's a good game. You enjoy it, you play it, and you think about the entertainment value of a video game. I don't know if you know this game, Civilization 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Sid Meier's and I know Sid from long ago. We were friends from. I haven't seen him recently, and a guy like Bruce Shelley who did Empires. We were at SPI together. So there are some of these very famous video designers I know personally. If I see Sid, we say hi to each other. He's a really nice guy. Gary Grigsby, and we're a bunch of guys who go back to the board game era before computer. Well, remember I go back to before computers, so there was no video game when I was that age. But the point of that all is that reviewers are, it's a free world. They say whatever they want. But what I offer is, and what I liked about what Katie was doing is she was trying to play the game enough to be really understand the game, understand the material, and then she's going to render a judgment. And then if she liked it or didn't like it, I would accept that. But when somebody kind of like does what we used to call a motorcycle tour of an art museum, you don't see the art too much. You're going by so fast. You think, oh, there was the Mona Lisa, and there's the Gauguin. You don't get to appreciate something if you're going really fast. So sometimes I say to reviewers, I understand if you're trying to scale up, it is what it is. And that's why they tend to review these smaller, quicker games because they can knock out 2 or 3 reviews in a day. But a game that's going to be of some weight, they may or may not like it, or they got to play it one time, and they got, one of those games they really like. But regardless, I think as your audience, the consumers of reviews should at least ask the question, how much did you play this thing and how deep did you get into it? I think is a fair question to ask the reviewer. And the reviewers I've known have been very honest. I played it only twice. And then you can judge how to view their view, right? It's like anything. So I think that a more informed, gamer community about how often did you play the game, did you like it or not like it? And again, a game that my games are rarely going to do well in a quick review because they tend to be longer. They tend to be mechanically a little bit more complex, so you can get, they can be deeper, more replayable, and there's a lot of strategy. But I will say that time has been good to me, not just getting older, but the fact is that Empire of the Sun, when it came out in Well, this was We the People came out in 1994, and it was universally. There was a bunch of people who really liked it, but most war gamers like spit on it. I mean, it was, and now it's considered much better. I did Empire of the Sun was done in 2005, and some people went crazy, and not in a good way. It was rated at the time on BGG like a 7.1. It's now rated, so that was now 2005 to now, that's 13 years ago, and it's now rated at 8.0. So my games tend to do better over time because it takes some time to understand them, which is fine because I think you get more value from them that way. And it also says that my games are not going to be what you're going to see from somebody else necessarily. I change it all. I do what I want to do. And that could be a problem for many, and that's why I haven't sold 10 million copies of some other people. But I will tell you that my games are always authentic. They tell their story authentically, and there's a good and a bad side of that. One of it is that you might have to spend some time with it. But on the other hand, if you spend some time, I think people have said, like with Empire of the Sun, there's a big payoff. And not all games give a big payoff.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it's funny that you say that about your games, right? Because I've done video game reviews for over a decade now. I'm still young, but I'm
going to say, we just started when you were 12?
No. I started when I was 18.
Yeah.
And
just to put that in perspective, you're the same age as my young son.
I'm 33. So, but one of the things, video games, is I've reviewed primarily strategy games, and then on the other spectrum, Japanese role-playing games. And what's actually, those two things have in common, their systems and their mechanics are usually quite deep. And to get through the average Japanese role-playing game, you're going to be playing for about 100 hours, 80 to 100 hours, just to get through the main story. And when you do that as a video game reviewer, you have to finish the game, because if you don't, there are a bunch of readers who are simply just not going to read your stuff because they're not going to take you seriously.
For the right reason, by the way.
What? Yeah,
for the right reason.
Yes, absolutely. But if you spend this much time, and I don't think you need to spend that much time with a board game, but if you spend this much time with a game, you learn the basic, you learn the game. If you spend 100 hours with a video game, you learn the mechanics.
Totally true.
A board game doesn't take that long. I mean, even the longest board, maybe 8 hours, right? For some of the longer games. That doesn't mean that you can apply if you review a video game after one play, then you could do the same with board game. No, because they're very different, and you have to play a game for a certain amount of time, especially a deeper game, to understand the mechanics. For example, a game like Fort Sumter is considered a short and simpler game, right?
Yeah,
considered. Very but I played the game 15 times before I even started my review. And even by game 11 or 12 or 15, I found new things in the mechanics. And that's why I ended up giving it a perfect score. And my point is basically...
Oh, that was you. Oh, I'm now putting, you understand, I read a lot of material. I didn't realize that was you who wrote that review. Oh,
yeah, that was me. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It was very kind. I didn't realize that until just now.
Well, but when I started doing board game reviews, because we were, for about half a year ago, we sat down, the editor, the site owner, and us reviewers, and we thought, we want to try something new. We want to add something new. And I had an interest in board games for a while. So I said, why don't we try this? But let's try something a bit different. Let's try something that is not covered by every main board game site in Denmark or Europe for that matter. Let's try war games. Let's try something that fits our readers a little more. But then I got into the business, and then you start reading other reviews, and you start realizing, okay, who are the biggest influencers in this? And what shocked me was that some of the biggest reviewers in the board game business did exactly what you say. They play several games on one day, and then they review them. And I was shocked. I was like, how are these people getting all these views? Why are the board gamers not asking more critically, did you play the game? I saw some reviews after I did my own review of Fort Sumter. I decided to see some reviews from some of the big reviewers. And I was shocked to find out they even got some rules wrong. And that's where that as a reviewer, I got upset because I was like, man, I've been doing this for, if I did this kind of work, people would stop reading me, and I would end in a metric shitstorm of hate, because nobody would take that kind of work from me. I spent so many hours writing and thinking before I even sit down and type. So I was shocked, and then I thought, and this is my next question, I thought, this is me as a reviewer, as a designer. How does that make you feel when people don't even get the rules right?
I got to tell you something. Well, first off, thank you for being the kind of person I can admire, who actually, has an opinion based on knowledge. I will tell everybody that a friend of mine who's a good reviewer named Bruce Garrick, he does Wild Weasel, and he works on 3 Moves Ahead and a couple other podcasts in English. And he made a comment which I really resonated to. It's that the difference between, and at least in board games, if you have to play 100 hours to get through a video game, that's a pretty intense experience. Although I played Civilization, 6 and 5, and all of them probably at least 100 hours each version of it, because that's one of the games I really like to play. The difference between the first play and the second play is dramatic. In other words, the first time you play any game, you go back and you go like, well, what's going on here? And maybe by the very end of the game, the very last couple of card plays, even in Fort Sumter, you're starting to go, oh, I could do this and I could do that. This knowledge starts to dawn upon you. So, if you play Churchill 2 or 3 times, that's when things will start to dawn on you, how you can start to manipulate. It's like anything in life. It's like let's talk about your. You said you have a 1-year-old. It's like playing a game is a little bit like being a 1-year-old. You first have to understand, what is this environment that I'm even in. Things are hard, things are light, things are dark. I mean, you have to just understand the environment. And then once you understand the environment, which takes for humans a little bit longer, but once you understand the environment, you can learn how to manipulate the environment. And manipulating the environment is like the second level of knowledge in a game. You get to manipulate the environment. And it's not until you get to the third level where you start to say, now that I understand how to manipulate it, how do I manipulate it to my benefit? Is strategy. And that climb up the ladder towards wisdom around a particular game requires you to put some effort into it. But once you get to the point where you've learned how to manipulate it and actually do strategy, then all of a sudden you can say whether you like or don't like something. Now you say to yourself, well, why should I torture myself? And the answer is you don't have to. I mean, it's entertainment. And if it was annoying you early on, you can stop, right? But if you're a reviewer and you've decided that you're going to review a product, there's a professional obligation to, I think, see it to at least to that end if you're going to have an opinion that's of any meaning. Now, how does it make me feel? I got to tell you, I told you I designed my first game was published in January of 1977. So that's a long time ago. And I have, I've gone through various, maturity levels of people liking and not liking my games and all that. Now, back in the day when we didn't have social media and computers, there were magazines like Fire and Movement. My good friend Roger McGowan did this magazine called Fire and Movement. There would be these written reviews, but from the time you produced the game to the time you saw the review, it could be a year before somebody would have an opinion, because there was no other way. And there was just people did word of mouth, of course. But, there's only so much of that back in those days. But now, a game comes out and within the same day or within 48 hours, somebody wants to be the first one to post a unboxing review, or they want to post my initial thoughts review. And you know that if they only got it a day ago, they couldn't have played it that much. That maybe they like it or they don't like it. I have a fan base, and my fans, God love them, they'll say nice things. And then I have a anti-fan base, and they will say the opposite. And I just learned over time just to pay no attention to it, because what I go back to is I will not publish a game unless I want to play it. See, so I have taken, like, Churchill is a good example. There was the Churchill that you like is the second version. The first version was done, was even ready to go to the printer, and I sat down and looked at it. I said, I don't want to play it. And so I said, if I don't want to play it, it's not going out under my name. So I called the publisher. They're very good friends. They understood, but they were not happy, because there's now all of a sudden this game was supposed to be going to the printer, going to publishing, and I said it's not going out. I then spent a year redoing it, and this version I really like, and so I'm proud of it, and I want to play. So if you and I were sitting in the room and your wife had nothing to do, I'd play Churchill with you like at the drop of a hat. We'd play Churchill because I want to play it, and so I don't want to put out a game that I don't want to play. So that's my basic criteria about when a game of mine goes out. And then if a reviewer doesn't like it, the answer is I like it. So I'm proud of it. I like it. And if you don't like it, I understand that. I don't feel badly toward you. I don't take it personally, and I just move on with my life. But it doesn't make me feel bad or good. It just says, oh, missed that one. One less sale. I'm going to say.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the right attitude. But if I can say something to the ordinary board game audiences, guys, be a little more critical of what you read.
Well, I think your question is the right one. Is how much time did you spend with the game before you rendered an opinion? And I think that if the answer is, if the answer is going to be if the amount of time I spent with the game is equal to like playing it once or twice, then not much. It's just not much. But like I said, a lot of people, it's a very fit. You have to appreciate, from somebody, in my perspective, I've seen the world change a lot, and it has really sped up. And I don't think people have time. With 6,000 new games a year, they don't have time to, curate all that. So they're looking for somebody else to curate this massive games into what are the ones that are worth playing. And if you go down that path, then you have to sign up to their opinion being your opinion. You have to sort of give up your opinion to those folks. And of course they have friends. And so, I think good games, and that's why I say time has been my ally in this period of time, that I believe that Churchill now is actually, I now see people playing it and, a lot more on a regular basis. I know that it's made it in. Now, will it ever break through to become a big hit? I doubt it. Because since Churchill came out in, what is on the box here? I don't remember when it came out. Was it 2014? Oh, this is the reprint. I think it came out in 2014. So 2014 is 4 years ago. That means that 25,000 new games have been published since then. It has found its audience. It'll continue to do well. People will play it, and I'm happy with that. It's like I said, it tells an authentic story, and I'm happy with that alone.
Yeah, definitely. So the final thing we're going to talk a bit about is something that is very near and dear to us at the site I work at, Joypad, and that is inclusivity. Mm-hmm. Like I said, you did a guest blog on Katie's Game Corner, and Katie is, from my perspective, one of the best advocates for inclusivity in our hobby. She does a lot of work writing about hard stuff and about things that people struggle with. Now we're both white heterosexual men, and
I'm an old white male guy. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah. So the struggles that minorities have, I don't think neither of us has ever felt. But I still think it could be interesting to hear from you as a designer. Do you think what kind of steps do you think we could do? Maybe both as designers, but also us influencers, or what you want to call us, to be more inclusive to new people, especially to people that are like you said, women and other minorities in the gaming hobby. It's still dominated by male men. I mean, male white males. So what do you think? Are there some steps we could do to be more inclusive?
Well, first off, without going into too many details, my family is an integrated family. So even though I'm white, not all my closest family members are. So, I have a very different view of, I've got grandchildren who are, half African American, and believe me, their lives matter a lot to me. So I can only say that I have a very open philosophy. And the idea, by the way, using the word woman in minority is there are more women than men in the world, just in case you were unclear on that point. So
yeah. I meant from the point of view of.
I know what you meant, but
Okay.
I'm just going on to the point is that I'm hopeful that women take over the world, actually, because I'm not liking the way the world looks right now. So I'm very excited about some more female leadership in the United States. I'm looking forward to that in a great way, because what women have figured out that men have not figured out is that it's better to get along to go along. You need to work together, and that does not seem to be a testosterone-laden kind of concept. So from that perspective, I'm not happy with the way things are in this world. As far as, what I personally, I have always been, the original, when I was a kid, I was growing up, the Declaration of Independence says, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, full stop. I take that at it, obviously even at the time when they wrote that, there was slavery, which was an abominable institution. We got rid of that through a war. But the point is, I think the general idea is the right one, is that if everybody should have rights to their life, they should have, be totally free to live their life the way they want in the pursuit of happiness. And so now what I do is I do authentic stories about things that I like to do. So Katie is awesome, and she happens to like war games. So she likes those themes. And so there's nothing about my designs that keep anybody from playing. Your wife plays Fort Sumter. Now, Fort Sumter is not a war game, even though it shows ends with a bombardment, but it's really a political game. Churchill is about ending a war. So there is war as a theme, and I would offer that more than half of human history is conflict, so it's hard to get away from. However, men and women don't like those stories. They don't want to talk about conflict. They want and that's why there's a lot of, again, there was 25,000 games published since Churchill came out in 2014, plenty of choices. So you don't have to go down this route. There's, tons of, I played a game which was really interesting called Photosynthesis, where it was about growing trees. Very clever game. I enjoyed it a great deal, and we play that regularly, and it's a very clever game. There's nothing, but however, I remember I told you I had a biology degree. When I walk into a forest, I see a war going on. You don't have to understand, it's a war for light. And so when I play photosynthesis, I understand this war for light is what it's about. And, who gets the light, who's taller, and who blocks it out. And, a well-done forest has very little undergrowth because those guys were put out of business unless you're low-light plants. I understand all that kind of thing. So inclusivity is always in my mind. I don't think I do anything in my games. Now, the one thing I have done in my games is I have a lot of friends who are colorblind. That's another kind of inclusivity. And so I go to my friends, I said, okay, I'm using these colors. Can you tell the difference? And they go, yes. And they say, no, I changed the colors. I mean, that's all I can do there. So I think that I applaud what Katie does. I will also say that members of my family do suffer from depression, and I really do feel that what she's going through at times really breaks my heart, but I understand it because, people very, very close to me deal with it every day, and so I get it. I think ultimately inclusivity requires you to be empathetic to the fact that somebody's different. You have to be empathetic to the fact that, if you were blessed with certain attributes, somebody else maybe wasn't. And you have to not judge them for that difference. And the idea that skin color makes any damn difference at all is just insane. As my son and my daughter-in-law have proven, if you can make kids, you're the same thing. You're all human. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. And to our readers, if you have any comments, let us know below. And I'm going to say again, thank you, Mark, for willing to do this interview. It's been very enlightening, and I will make sure to to do some more reviews of your games in the future.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint you. And if you do, feel free to tell me what I did wrong.
At least I'll have played it enough to know.
Then I think I can live with that under any circumstance.
That's good.
And I really do hope. I have to say that one of the places I will get back to before it's all said and done, I have to get back to Denmark. It was a great experience. I would like to get my wife back there. If I can I tell you a funny story about Billund?
Oh yeah, do that. Yeah.
So, and this is not a story where I come out on top. So, I go to Billund to Legoland, and they, because I was an executive and I was doing this job for Lego, they put me up in the best room in that hotel that's on the grounds there. So I'm on the 6th floor, and I have this beautiful view of Legoland. It's all out before me, but I'm on the 6th floor, and there's nothing anywhere nearby that's even close to that. So I have my shades are open, and I'm getting out of my suit. I'm going to put on jeans. We're going to go to Legoland, right? That's, get my sneakers and stuff. And so thankfully, I'm down to my undergarments, and all of a sudden, this very sunny day in Denmark, it gets very cloudy. Like the room is like the sun goes out. I turn around, and there's a gondola with 80 people taking pictures of me through my hotel window. And apparently, there's a ride that goes up and down every 10 minutes with this gondola, so people get the view that I have from my window. Only I didn't know that. So I think I'd shown up in the holiday albums of a bunch of people waving to them in my underwear, which I found very amusing. Then after that, I kept my shades closed. So that was one of my experiences in Billund, but I did enjoy it nevertheless.
Yeah, that's good. Well, in Denmark, we are a very open country, so yeah.
Thank God.
I think that's a fantastic note to end the interview. Finally, Mark, where can people find you? What's your Twitter handle?
So it's that @ Mark Herman 54, which is the last two numbers of the year I was born. Mark Herman 54.
Okay, good. Well, thanks again, Mark. And like he said, you can hit him up on Twitter and look at our reviews at Joypad.dk to read more on Churchill and Fort Sumter and hopefully Empire of the Sun in the future.